The SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry, founded in 1911, is now the only institution of higher learning in the United States dedicated solely to the study of natural resources and the environment.
Hello and welcome to Improve Your World with SUNY-ESF. I'm your host, Don Torrance, and today we're talking about water, as in watershed protection. A watershed is the land area that drains into a particular river, lake, or ocean. Protecting that watershed means keeping pollutants and contaminants from reaching the water. Now, one of the most unique watersheds in New York is Skaneateles Lake. It's so pure it supplies drinking water for the city of Syracuse with no filtration needed. SUNY-ESF researcher Dr. Russ Briggs is studying the effort to keep agricultural runoff from reaching that water.
This is a watershed that's a source of drinking water for Syracuse and the surrounding area. And at the present, they're operating without filtration avoidance. And so that requires extremely high water quality. And so that requires a lot of vigilance to make sure that that water quality is maintained. So this is a very clean, probably of the Finger Lakes, one of the cleanest. And just very, very clear, very high quality water. On the average, a little over half that watershed is forested. And then the next portion's ag, and then there's a smaller urban component. And so the ag is concentrated largely around Grout Brook, and then some around, I think around Shotwell Brook. And then there are other parts of for instance, Bear Swamp Stream is largely forested with a very small proportion of agriculture. So the different watersheds have different components of agriculture and forested land. And of course, forest land is the primary source of the clearest, purest water, and agricultural practices have a potential to degrade water quality from fertilization and runoff and a variety of things. Now, the agricultural parts of these watersheds have been cared for very highly. They've had a very high success rate in the implementation of forestry ag BMPs, best management practices. And those, they've been ongoing. So we came into this and most of the watershed was implemented with these best management practices. Only about 5 or 6 farms, or maybe 7, were in the process of installing them. So we're coming in kind of at the back end where most of the improvements have been made. And so our way of looking at this was to compare the agricultural watersheds with the forested watersheds in terms of water quality. So we looked for watersheds where we could define specific areas dominated by forest, dominated by agriculture, and then at the outlet or the main confluence of where most of that practice was concentrated, we would sample the streams. So we set up a system of over 4 watersheds, 2 of them very large, divided into 2 pieces, and selecting stream samples at that point where we periodically collect the stream water, we measure the flow rates and the stage, and then we kind of scale that up to a watershed basis with some modeling. The samples, they come in and they're put in the refrigerator if they're going to be analyzed immediately, or they're put in the freezer. Okay? As soon as we get those samples, we'll then process it probably 40 or 50 at a time just for economies of scale, and we'll analyze them for nitrate and ammonium and total nitrogen, phosphate, orthophosphate, suspended sediments, electroconductivity, total suspended sediments, and turbidity. And all those variables are indicators of water quality. So we're looking for basically crisp, clean water with low nitrates and low phosphates as being kind of quote pristine. At this point in time, we see very little difference in water quality between the watersheds on the ag that are dominated by ag and those that are dominated by forest, which suggests, at least right now, would suggest that the system of best management practices is effective, and at least the water quality is comparable. If we saw the water quality wasn't comparable, we say maybe those management practices aren't effective. But this would suggest that those management, or at least they're working as planned.
Dr. Briggs attributed the cleanliness of Skaneateles Lake to the use of best management practices by area farmers. Ryan Cunningham works for the Onondaga County Soil and Water Conservation District, and he works with the area farmers to implement those best practices.
We're standing in the middle of a farm field.
Yep.
And you're with the Onondaga County Soil and Water Conservation District.
Yep.
What is it you're doing here?
Well, first of all, I work in the Skaneateles Lake Watershed Agricultural Program, which is a sub-program of Onondaga County Soil and Water. It's funded primarily from the city of Syracuse, the main goal being to work on the farms out here to make them environmentally sound and help protect the drinking water for the city of Syracuse, which is Skaneateles Lake.
And what are some of the things that you're trying to do in this area?
Well, I'd say two of the main things that we try to do are to protect the pathogens from moving off of farms, and also to prevent sediments from leaving sites and making it into the lake, which causes turbid water, which is a tough thing to deal with when you're using that as a source of drinking water.
For those not familiar, explain what pathogens are and why you're worried about them.
Mainly pathogens would be Giardia or Cryptosporidium, which are prevalent among the young stock on farms. So some of the biggest things we do are to separate the youngest animals from the oldest, therefore kind of quarantining the young animals and the pathogens they may have, managing manure separately, therefore not running off of the land into surface waters.
And this is the kind of thing that's being done all around Skaneateles Lake?
It is, yep, in more ways than one. Sometimes we're working directly on the farm. Other times we'd be working at a stream site such as this. Manure from the farms is used as a nutrient supplied to these fields to raise the the nutrients of the field, help the crops grow. So that manure not only can be a problem on farms, but off of farms as well, in a site such as this.
And how far away from the lake, Skaneateles Lake, are we right now?
Right now, as far as the water goes, we're a couple miles through a tributary right here. As the crow flies, probably a little less than that, maybe about a mile.
But we're standing right next to what is, I guess, the main drainage area of this this farm field.
Yep, we're actually in the northeast corner of the watershed right now, in an area referred to as the Shotwell Brook subwatershed. It's considered the third largest subwatershed in the Skaneateles Lake watershed. Right now, we're on a tributary to the main channel of Shotwell Brook, so this would be just considered a major tributary to the Shotwell Brook subwatershed.
On this particular day in late fall, this little tributary doesn't look like it would be much of a problem for anybody.
It really doesn't. Some of the work we did here really concentrates on the large storm events that would pass through here, such as a snow melt, heavy rains in early and late spring. That's really the times when a channel like this would be really full of water. It's to manage the storm water coming off these fields.
So it could have water in it at other times of the year,
Yep.
But if it's not the kind of stormwater runoff or snowmelt runoff, then that kind of water doesn't present that much of a problem.
Not normally, no. And as you can see, some of the grasses here, we have thick vegetation in the riparian areas, which help to filter some of the stormwater coming off. However, the size of this channel the capacity of this channel can hold large storm events, which is they definitely do happen from time to time. Larger storm events can come in. You may have a 10-year dry period, but then the 11th year you may have a large storm that comes through.
The vegetation that we're seeing alongside this tributary is not here by accident.
Well, it wasn't normally. Vegetation will grow up in that areas. We actually came in here and did quite a large project of stream bank stabilization. This particular stretch of stream had a severe incising of banks, which led to a massive erosion and cutting of banks, which filled in the stream with sediment, ultimately which ends up at the outlet of this stream, which is in Skaneateles Lake. So some of the vegetation we put in here was after extensive excavations, which left the land extremely bare. So we came in with hydroseeding equipment, stream willows, which is a plant that we planted in here, some actual biodegradable mesh that keeps the banks stabilized, and with a mixture of native grasses that we put in by ourselves.
Because every time water turns a corner, it tends to try and take something with it.
It tends to, especially during large storm events. It really will. This is one of our engineered rock riffles. A lot of this area is overgrown now with vegetation, which is what we like to see. And the purpose of these, in the area just back on the other downside slope there, was a nice little pool habitat area. Some of these rock riffles are going to slow down the velocity of this, and you can see some of the rocks on the outside of this is a rock outlet protection. When the water heads through these and at high velocities, that helps disperse some of the velocity and get it going to a normal channel flow. Yep.
Let's back up a little bit and talk about the word riparian. What's that mean in this context?
It's generally the area that's right outside the mainstream channel, which separates the aquatic from the terrestrial areas right here. Anything that's right outside, the main water area would be the riparian area.
And what you planted in here, you planted for a reason. I mean, these are specific kinds of plants. You mentioned one like a form of willow.
Yep, a stream willow is a plant that's used commonly to help with stream bank erosion. As you probably can see from a lot of lakes and areas, they're surrounded by black willows and willows of different species. They're native to water areas. They love being submerged in water, so it's a great plant to use to stabilize stream banks.
One of the things that ESF has worked on for a number of years is developing a large number of varieties of shrub willow.
Yep.
Is that one of them, or?
I have heard of that, and we did actually use ESF to contact to help us out in choosing some of the vegetation for out here. They didn't actually come out and plant it for us, but they gave us plenty of information on what to use, what would be native to this area, what type of willow to use. So they were of a great assistance for our program here.
Now, how far from the tributary that we're standing next to, how far do you have to plant into the field in order to present a good buffer zone? And I guess another way of putting that is, how much of the farmland does the farmer have to give up in order to make this work?
The riparian area, generally, I usually shoot for about 30 feet or so. It depends on the slope of the land. As you can see around here, it's a fairly shallow slope. And what people don't realize, and sometimes we have to work with the farmers to point out, is that the edges of the fields are generally marginal lands for crops. They generally don't do as well. So if we can pay to offset some of this area, if the farm can give up 30 feet or so of an edge of a field, generally they're going to get their best crops outside that buffer area. Now,
doing this kind of best management practice, there's an expense involved.
Oh, there sure is, yeah. This project in particular, these can cost tens of thousands of dollars to do. Not to mention all the time it takes to design these, work with engineers, work with folks at ESF to figure out some of the vegetative measures we can do.
And so is there some program that the government offers to help encourage people in agriculture to follow these best management practices?
Yeah, there is. The Natural Resource Conservation Service, or NRCS, is what we use to get a lot of our standards and specifications for these projects. And they have plans offered through the Farm Bill for the United States Department of Agriculture, which supplies funding for areas such as these, offsetted areas, riparian areas, and they will actually pay by the acre the farmer if they can offset these areas just to use as a natural habitat.
And the value in that everybody else benefits from is keeping a water resource like Skaneateles Lake,
that's right,
clean enough to be used for drinking water without filtration.
That's right, yep. Of course, filtration and a little bit of fluoride and chlorine is about all they put in. It definitely helps, even in storm events, these riparian areas can help slow surface runoff from coming off. If you have contaminated water coming off the land, it gives it a time to settle out, to filter out a little bit before it ends up in our streams.
Is this something that can be replicated at other lakes that are not in such pristine condition as Skaneateles Lake?
It sure can. We're lucky to have the funding to help us out with Skaneateles Lake because it's the drinking source for Syracuse, but these type of programs, NRCS works federally. They're around the whole country, so they can work around any watershed that be willing to work with them. It does cost some money sometimes from the landowner to contribute, whether it's a 75%, 25% cost share, but the assistance is there. Yep.
Let's talk a little bit more about the best management practices. Riparian buffer zones are just one among many, right?
Sure, yep. Some of the other practices we have in here, this includes some of the structural measures, and this is where some of the pricing comes in because we have to have heavy equipment, put in things such as engineered rock riffles and excavated pools, which are not only to control some of the velocities from stormwater, but also at the same time trying to contribute to some of the habitat here. Some of these excavated pools that are beyond the rock riffles are meant to be for fish habitat.
And these are things that, have they been done, all of those things been used in this particular location, or they're used at various locations around the lake depending on what the need is?
Depending on what the need is, usually it's assessed beforehand. There's actually 6 or 7 rock riffle pool segments in this stretch of stream right here. This was identified in a whole farm plan for one of our cooperators in the watershed, so it was something identified early on as a problem spot, so we had some time to think about it. We did put in some of the rock riffles, the pools, some of the stream bank stabilization here, and even a culvert crossing.
Where do you move on to from here?
Well, from here we've got plenty of things to do. Streams are quite a priority in the Shotwell Brook subwatershed due to the sedimentation problems that have been identified in the past. Also on-farm projects such as soil management projects, pathogen-related management projects, things of that nature.
Several of those best management practices can also be used in urban and suburban settings to resolve similar problems. One that's been very useful is the riparian buffer zone.
Well, riparian ecology, riparian is a word that simply means on the riverbank. And it is the zone that is influenced by streams and rivers Typically, everybody's seen a riparian zone. It's the area that's typically lush, close to the stream. It's used by a lot of birds and wildlife for their life histories, for breeding, for habitat. And the riparian zone is very important to the stream ecosystem because it provides leaf litter, which provides energy for the food chain in the water. It provides branches, dead branches and trunks that fish and insects can use to escape high flows, and it's basically coupled very tightly with the stream ecosystem. So I study how the land ecosystem, the terrestrial zone, and the aquatic zone are linked.
Is this something that occurs naturally?
Oh yeah, you know, the riparian zones vary in their width and the species that inhabit them and their configurations. You know, depending on the climate, the zone, the position in the watershed, whether it's way up in the mountainous headwaters or down in the lowland valleys. But riparian zones are simply a function of the fact that there's water flowing and that it influences the ecosystem close to the stream.
But knowing what they are and how they work means that we have the opportunity to create them where they don't exist, or where they've been destroyed, or where they're in need of improvement.
Well, yeah, stream restoration is a big concern, and it's really gained popularity, I'd say, since the 1960s and 70s. There was a big effort by several government agencies, many government agencies, to channelize streams. Streams were thought of, especially in urban areas, as dangerous areas, dangerous zones, because they created flooding. They, you know, they were dangerous for kids. They collected typically, you know, sewage and waste products, and it was really important to shunt that out of the cities. Since then, we've learned about these connections, how important they are to the environment, and also there's a real aesthetic value to streams, and people really value that now. So there's a big industry and interest in stream restoration. So it's important to understand these linkages that I was talking about between the land and the water in order to make stream restoration successful, because it's not just a matter of putting the water back or putting the trees back, but it's understanding, you know, how they're tightly linked to cycles of flooding, to cycles of drought, to all kinds of you know, physical factors that affect how the ecosystem looks.
To connect this with what we've been talking about earlier on this program, and that is use of best management practices in agricultural zones to protect watersheds like Skaneateles Lake, and riparian buffer zones are one practice that we saw pretty dramatically earlier in the program with a look at a farm field and how the watershed is affected there. But this is something that has an impact in urban and suburban areas in the stream restorations that you're talking about, because we have a great many streams that were channelized for the very reason that you said that they were considered dangerous. Onondaga Creek is one. Meadowbrook is another, I assume, that falls into that category?
Yeah, Meadowbrook is an interesting example. I actually happen to live in the lower reaches of Meadowbrook, just over the Syracuse border, and the Meadowbrook receives about all of its runoff in the form of stormwater runoff. So the storm sewers collect precipitation, collect rainwater from the storms and snow melt, and they deliver it straight to the stream. And that delivery happens very quickly. And that's very unusual. That's different from the natural condition where typically rain and snow would percolate through the soil and then get to the stream eventually, but in a much slower fashion, in a much more sort of drawn out fashion. Nowadays, in urban areas where storm drains collect the runoff, there's very fast response by the channel, and what that can result in is a lot of pollutants being delivered to the channel and more erosive power by the stream, because all of a sudden there's just more water there more quickly.
One of the things we've heard talked about are some new developments in landscape design, things like bioretention basins, wider use because people realize the problems with stormwater runoff. The problem is there's only so much of that you can do. It's still going to, water is going to follow its natural course. So once it reaches a stream like Meadow Brook, and that brook has been channelized to prevent some of the other problems that you were talking about, you've created, in some situations, heavy rainfall or heavy fast snowmelt, some serious downwater consequences.
Yeah, and the downstream consequences, I mean, you'll see in terms of, you know, more debris accumulations, where there are houses or pieces of infrastructure that are right up against the creek. It can you know, the increased erosive power can be threatening to those structures. In the lower Meadowbrook neighborhood, the neighbors are actually concerned about this because there's a perception that there's been more erosivity occurring, more erosion occurring since channelization, since urbanization of the Meadowbrook watershed. One possibility, now once you've connected a watershed to its stream via storm drains, unless you break those connections, you're not going to change the nature of those peak flows. You know, they're permanently connected. They're going to be delivered quickly downstream. That means that there's limited options. Now, as you mentioned, there's a lot you can do upstream in the terms of rain gardens and detention basins. Some of those are engineered structures. Some of those can be citizen inputs, citizen initiatives for making their own lawns and driveways more permeable. Those are all to be encouraged, and they should be encouraged, you know, by cities and with education programs and so on. But the downstream sections then have limited options. One of those is, though, to use vegetation to harden up the stream bank a little bit. To basically, I don't normally recommend channelizing streams unless they really pose a danger to infrastructure. But you can do a lot with, for example, shrub willows or planting trees that will help dry out floodplains during extended floods, that will help provide some bank protection in the form of, you know, roots that are kind of intertwined. So there's some limited options that are possible, for sure. What
are some of the specific things that you're looking at for Meadowbrook?
Well, for Meadowbrook, we're looking at planting. The town of DeWitt has been very receptive to the neighbors' concerns, and the DeWitt Advisory Conservation Commission has provided free trees and planting for the neighbors for putting more trees along the banks to replace some of the older trees that are toward the end of their lifespan. So that's one aspect. I'm also going to look along with some professors and researchers at ESF into the possibility of growing shrub willows along particular vulnerable parts of the stream bank as a method of bank protection, as a method of beautification. You know, it can serve many purposes.
When you put in plantings like that, location is perhaps the most important part.
Yeah, location is, and location both in terms of, you know, the concerns, the physical conditions of the creek, you know, where's the most erosion occurring, but also willows tend to need a lot of light, so the environmental location is also critical. So that's why it's important to know something about the life history of the trees, to know whether they're native or introduced, to know whether they will, you know, if introduced, will they spread uncontrollably. That would be a byproduct that we wouldn't want to see. But you know, doing a little bit of basic research into what you plant, I think is a good idea. And there's plenty of resources around. There's ESF folks, there's Cornell Extension, a lot of the conservation commissions that advise towns have really good people on their boards that can advise you in terms of what would be a good species to plant.
Well, would there also be a possibility for using things like grasses or different kinds of shrub or even rock in particular places to help deter the problems?
That can help, and there's a long tradition of using large rocks and tree trunks and natural materials, not concrete or metal or something, but to help protect banks. Some of these projects are not successful because the erosive power, the erosion is just too great, or the design is not adequate to the situation. You have to be careful about just sort of dumping hard things in a riverbank, because oftentimes the river is just going to move around them, and it'll just divert that erosion to either the opposite bank, or it'll go around it and leave a pile of rubble in the middle.
But the problem is solved if it becomes your neighbor's problem.
Well, that's something for you to negotiate with your neighbor.
That wouldn't be a good thing, and I guess the history of man is riddled with the discovery that nature will have its own way if you're not careful.
That's right. Nature bats last.
That's a good one. This is the kind of thing that's not just specific to a stream or a brook in central New York. This is the kind of thing that can be done, that needs to be done anywhere in the country.
Oh yeah, and there's really good resources online. The Environmental Protection Agency has a website for stream restoration, and they have something called the Watershed Academy, and it's a great resource for information about streams, and it's irrespective of region, within the U.S. And people in many regions have taken advantage of it. And there's these short tutorials that are very good for educating people about how streams function, what we can do to help improve their function, and what is important in terms of looking long term at how these streams evolve with their watersheds. One thing I really want to also mention, we talked earlier about how once you connect a watershed to its stream with storm drains, with a network of storm drains, you've kind of passed a point of no return. And what that means is that protection in the upstream areas is really key. It's sort of like an immunization regime or something. It's a preventative medicine. So that's why it's very important, not to pour oil into storm sewers, or not to, over fertilize or over apply pesticides on lawns, because all that stuff ends up in the stream, and it doesn't have a chance to go through the soil to become, filtered. So there's something that all of us can do in order to keep our streams more healthy. And just as an anecdote, we had an ESF class in my backyard last week. Karin Limburg, a fisheries biologist, brought her fisheries class to Meadow Brook, and they electroshocked and fished to see what actually grew in Meadow Brook. And we were absolutely surprised. We found the biggest species by far, the most abundant, was brown trout, which is a fairly sensitive species. It needs cool water, it needs clean water, it needs insects that can grow under the rocks, and we thought we would find only species that were really adapted to poor water conditions. So there's hope, and with there's a lot more optimism about the condition of Meadow Brook, but it's going to take all of us to maintain good practices on our lawns, in our backyards, and also by the cities to do things like build retention basins and provide good leadership for being stewards of our urban streams.
It sounds like these are the kind of things that people need to be aware of in the planning stages of new developments or new building projects.
That's the biggest catch, and that's what, as a nation, we're not particularly good at. We tend to have very decentralized planning, and oftentimes what that means is that environmental issues become problems because they haven't been adequately planned for. And that is the biggest threat, I think, right now to streams. It's not necessarily the urban areas, it's the suburban areas, and it's the exurban sprawl that's not being planned very well. This is throughout our nation, and that's threatening well, not our forests, but also our waterways.
Well, that will do it for this edition of Improve Your World with SUNY-ESF. I'm Don Torrance. Please join us again next time.